Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video 5, Setting Up an SMTP Relay Server in Exchange 2003. In this video, we're going to start off taking a look at SMTP virtual servers, something we touched on briefly in the last video, but we're going to expand on this quite a bit more in this video and get into the properties and details of the SMTP virtual server so you're comfortable with the different settings that you can configure. After we've gone through the settings, we're then going to take a quick look at how to create a new SMTP server and also some of the reasons you may want to do that. From there, we're going to go into the Postmaster account. So we're going to finalize those settings so we have an official Postmaster account set up. And then we're going to get into a new subject related to SMTP, and that's an SMTP relay server. So we're going to take a look at how to set this up, why you would use one in your organization, and then once we have it set up and working properly where email is going in and out of the network, well then we're going to install GFI Mail Essentials on top of this server and really get a great tool for both viruses as well as content filtering. Okay, stuff that checks attachments and content within the actual email itself. Okay, let's get started first, and we're going to take a look at what an SMTP virtual server actually is. Okay, so first off, SMTP in Exchange is used for email submission by clients and email delivery by servers. So when you open up Outlook and you send an email out to somebody else, you're using SMTP to start off that message delivery. Servers, on the other hand, they're actually picking up that email and then they're delivering it from server to server, also using SMTP. Okay, so when we install Exchange 2003, by default, one SMTP virtual server is installed, and for most organizations that's sufficient, okay, and you won't need any additional SMTP virtual servers. Now, this concept of a virtual server, sometimes this throws people. So, we're referring to this up here. When we say a virtual server, we're just referring to a service pretty much that's installed on top of our Exchange server. Now, we can create additional instances of SMTP. So if I wanted to, I could say create a second instance of SMTP, and that basically is another virtual server. Okay, now why would we want to do that? Why do we want to create additional instances of SMTP? Well, we've listed some of the reasons here. These include fault tolerance. You may have another SMTP virtual server set up in case you have problems with one SMTP virtual server. Maybe you have unique settings on it. Maybe you want to do some work, and just in case there's a mistake made on one of the SMTP virtual servers, the other one is still going to be able to deliver email. Okay, you also may have additional email domains. For example, we have sophiestoybox.com and sophiestoybox.net. Now, you're not required to use separate SMTP virtual servers for each one of these, but for unique settings, you may want to divide these up. Okay, so you've got a different SMTP virtual server for each one of your email domains. Another reason is for security. In certain situations, you may require some clients to connect to the SMTP virtual server in a secure fashion, such as using SSL. Well, in other cases, maybe your internal clients, you're not so worried about security there. So in those cases, you're not interested in installing SSL and you'd rather have better performance. So you might have two separate SMTP virtual servers for that reason as well. Okay, and lastly, we have unique settings. And I've mentioned this a couple times already, but you may have different settings on the actual SMTP virtual server that you want to apply to certain users or certain email domains. Okay, so that would be another last reason you would do this. Okay, let's go over and actually take a look at our default SMTP virtual server, and we have this set up on Exchange One. Okay, so we're going to connect over to Exchange One using a remote desktop connection. And we're logging on as the domain administrator, and we're going to start up System Manager. Okay, within System Manager, we need to go within Administrative Groups, down through Servers, into the actual Exchange server itself, and then open up Protocols. Now here you see the default protocols that are actually installed when you install Exchange 2003. One thing that is different about Exchange 2003 than Exchange 2000 is that some of these protocols are actually turned off by default, and this is for security. Now HTTP, if we look at this, we see that it is started, okay, and you'll be able to notice that once we look at IMAP 4. It's stopped by default, as well as NNTP, and POP3 is also stopped by default. Now we're worried about SMTP right now, and if we look right here, we see that we have a default SMTP virtual server. So this was installed. We did nothing as far as configuring this. This is part of the default Exchange 2003 installation. Now, first thing, you should realize that, remember, all email is submitted from clients through this SMTP server. This is the service on the Exchange server that handles that. And then this Exchange server also uses this SMTP virtual server to communicate with other Exchange servers. Okay, so from time to time, you will run into issues where this SMTP server gets bogged down, and just like any service, you may have to stop and restart it. Okay, so one thing you should be aware of that you can do right off the bat is stop and restart this service, either using these buttons up here or by right-clicking it. Okay, and you can stop the service altogether, or you can pause it. The only difference here being that if you pause the service, okay, we're going to pause it right now, and that's what this indicates here, this service will not disconnect people who are currently using it. So if you're sending an email right now, let's say you're sending a mass email out to 100 people, your connection is still going to remain, and you'll be able to send that email. Any new connections that are attempted, though, will fail, and they won't be able to connect until you restart the service. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click Start here and have this SMTP virtual server up and running again. Now, this is one area where you can stop and restart the service. Another area, kind of the master SMTP service, is within your services. And let's go take a quick look at that just so you're familiar with it. So I'm just right-clicking my computer and going out to my computer management console. Now, within Services and Applications, and then Services, down here towards the bottom, we see that we have the Simple Mail Transport Protocol service. And this is automatic and started right now. But if you're running into a problem, something's not functioning correctly with your SMTP, maybe email is just not flowing, you can stop and restart this service. Okay, here you can see that you can just click restart, and it'll first stop it and then start it back up again. Okay, so just a quick troubleshooting tip. This is important anytime you run into issues where mail's not being delivered, either outbound or inbound. Okay, so back inside here, we're going to go to that default SMTP virtual server, and what we're going to do is take a look at the properties associated with it. So I'm going to right-click it, go to Properties, and there's quite a few settings in here, okay, and it's real simple to get confused with all these different settings. We'll do our best to explain these, and I'll spend more time on the settings that are more important, okay, so we might gloss over certain settings pretty quickly, but the reason is they're typically not used or the defaults work great. Okay, first off here we have this IP address, and it's set at all unassigned right now. Basically what this is stating to you is that, you know, this machine is going to use any IP address that's available on this server. Okay, so if there's multiple network cards or multiple IP addresses available, it's just going to grab one of them. It doesn't really care. Just so you get into a good habit, it is important that we start using the proper IP address. For example, on our NAT server, remember that we have configured for all email to be sent to 192.168.200.100. And if for some reason this machine has 2 or 3 IP addresses, well, it might grab one of those IP addresses that the NAT server is not configured to send email to. So I do recommend go ahead and just pull in here the right IP address, although this assignment here is going to work initially. Okay, so we're going to set this here. Next thing, if you click this advanced button, this gives you a display of the IP address and the port number that's being used. By default, you do want to use that, default port number here, port 25. So this combination, 192.168.200.100 and port 25, this is how this Exchange server is actually reachable. If we were to set up additional SMTP virtual servers, you have to use a unique combination. Okay, we could not set up same IP address and same port number and expect both of these SMTP virtual servers to function correctly. Okay, so we're going to cancel out of here. Now we got a couple settings here. Limit number of connections to. Okay, and typically you're going to leave this unchecked. That's fine. If you find that your Exchange server is having a hard time dealing with the number of connections that are coming inbound to it, you can select this box and put a number in here, whatever seems to work. And I would just search Google, look for a best practices type of number. But if you put in 50 here, then you're going to be able to accept 50 inbound connections before it starts refusing connections out to other clients. Connection timeout. This is referring to how long you're actually idle before your connection's timed out. So when you establish a connection with this server, let's say that you establish a connection to send an email, After 10 minutes of time, that connection is going to be timed out, and if you want to send another email through the server, you're going to have to reestablish a new connection, which is not really a big deal. It's just a little bit of overhead that's being involved here. Another thing that I recommend is to enable logging. Okay, and logging is going to give you detailed information about your SMTP virtual server here, and this information can be used in case you run into instances where you may have spam or email or some sort of hacking going on. So I do recommend that you enable logging. The default right here is great. You do have different choices, but we're going to use this W3C extended log file format and then leave that alone. Other information, you can control where the log file is stored. Okay, how often to run this log file as far as a new log schedule is concerned, and then you can choose exactly what you want to log. Okay, and these are just extended log options where you can specify even more than the default information that's already logged. Okay, so that's one thing you do want to take a look at. As a starting point, I do recommend that you enable logging and start taking a look at these logs on a fairly regular basis. Okay, going through to the next tab, the Access tab. Quite a few settings within here as well. Okay, the first one we're dealing with is access control, and you can see right here it says enable anonymous access and edit the authentication methods for this resource. Let's go ahead and click on this and see what they're talking about. Now this is referring to authentication coming from our internal machines here. Okay, so on our sophystoybox.com.local domain, it's called, you have the choice of what you want to do here. Okay, so if we want anonymous access enabled, this will allow anybody to connect to this SMTP server and send email out through it. Okay, so actually it's going to let you connect into it. There's another setting that we have to look at to determine whether or not we'll be able to send email out through the SMTP virtual server. I recommend that you deselect the anonymous access on this particular or in this particular location. We're going to look at another location here in a second, but for right now I would recommend that you just leave this as it is. Okay, basic authentication, you can leave that selected or you can deselect it if you want to add even more security to your domain. Just have to be careful with this though, because passwords are sent in clear text. Okay, so if you're working in a non-secure location, this stuff can be sniffed off the network. Okay, and here, integrated Windows authentication, this is the default authentication method used within Windows Active Directory, and this is going to give you your most secure authentication. Now, by default, your clients are going to start off using integrated Windows authentication. If this fails, then they'll go down to the basic authentication and start trying to use that method there. Okay? This users button, grant or deny submit permissions to specific users or groups. Okay, if you click here, this is basically allowing particular users or groups to submit email, okay, email submission. So you're basically, if you don't want certain users to be able to send email at all or just through this one default SMTP virtual server, this is the place you'd go to actually do that. We're going to leave this alone right now. There's other ways we can do that, and by default, we want everybody to be able to send email within our organization. Okay, next we have secure communications. If you want to install a digital certificate here, you can install an SSL certificate. You can install this certificate. We're going to go through this process in the next video when we install Outlook Web Access, but if you needed this SMTP virtual server to be secure, you can do that. As I mentioned before though, on the internal network, with integrated authentication, there's nothing for you to worry about from that standpoint. You do have secure communication already set up. Where this can be handy is when you're using this SMTP virtual server. If you want to give, let's say, POP3 users out there on the internet, you want to allow them to be able to send email from remote locations like their hotel or from home or just wherever they might be traveling. In those cases, you can install a certificate and require them to use SSL whenever they're authenticating. That way, instead of them passing insecure communications across that communication channel, you can use a digital certificate and you don't have nothing to worry about when it comes to authenticating and communicating with this SMTP virtual server. Next button we've got is connection. Okay, select which computers may access this virtual server. You see that all except the listed below. Okay, now this may seem not correct to you, but basically what we're doing right here, we want everybody to be able to actually contact this SMTP virtual server, all computers. Okay, from an internal standpoint, your computer needs to be able to communicate with this SMTP server in order to send email. From an external standpoint, let's say that Joe at AOL.com sends you an email. Well, the AOL.com SMTP server also is going to need to contact this SMTP virtual server in order to communicate and send an email message to it. Okay, so this is the default. This is what you want to leave. You can, however, if you find that you're getting a lot of unauthorized access, let's say you're getting spam or you're getting people trying to hack in, you can add single IP addresses, or you can add a whole subnet, okay, or you can even specify a domain itself down here just by entering in that domain. Now this is telling you right here, and it's a good warning to heed, restricting access by domain name requires a DNS reverse lookup on each connection. Very expensive operation and will dramatically affect server performance. Okay, when they say expensive, they're referring to how much server performance we're really talking about, and they stress to you it's very expensive, so take that warning as they give it to you. So for example, if we enter in some domain name such as spammers.com, okay, this is okay to put in here, but keep in mind that every time an email comes in from, let's say, Joe at spammers.com, we're going to have to do a reverse lookup, find that IP address, and then block that. So we're talking about quite a few DNS reverse lookups, and every time email is coming through here, this is going to cause quite a congestion problem. So we don't want to put this in here. We're going to go ahead and remove this right now. We just use that as an example. Okay, so leave the default settings here. And then our next setting is relay restrictions, and this is a very important setting. You don't really need to change anything here, but we want to take a look at this just to make sure you know exactly what we're dealing with here. Grant or deny permissions to relay email through this SMTP virtual server. Now we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what a relay is, but just so you have a general introduction to the concept, relaying is what a server needs to do in order to actually send email from one domain to another. So when you send email, let's just say Bob Bass at sophiestoybox.com sends an email out to Joe at AOL.com, what's going to happen is the SMTP server Exchange 1 is going to take that email and it's going to attempt to contact the SMTP server for AOL.com. That's considered a mail relay, and we need to allow this, otherwise we're never going to get an email past this actual server. So the only email that's going to take place is internally on our network. On the flip side, Joe at AOL.com also may be sending an email internally to Bob Bass at sophiestoybox.com. Now when he sends that email, the SMTP server at AOL.com is going to contact and send that email to Exchange 1. If relaying is not allowed at all, okay, if we're not allowed to get that in, what's going to happen is that email is going to be blocked. Okay, so we need to actually allow this to happen. What we don't want to happen is for Joe at AOL.com to send a message to, let's say, Sue at Yahoo.com and have it go through our SMTP server. Okay, this is what spammers do. They're using our SMTP virtual server to send email out to other people. And what this does is masks their identity, and it also is going to get us in trouble, okay? Because Sue at Yahoo.com is going to get this spam, and she's going to see that it's from our SMTP virtual server in our domain. She's going to report us, and we're going to be blacklisted. And essentially then, other companies who subscribe to these blacklists are going to add our domain to their bad spammers list, and now legitimate email that we're trying to send out is going to be blocked. Okay, so long story short here, let's take a look at these relay restrictions, okay, and pay attention closely to what they say. Select which computer may relay through this virtual server. And by default, we have only the list below, and then all except the list below. We definitely want this top one selected. Okay, email that is relayed through our server means that it's coming to our server, and then it's going to be sent back out to other machines. The only email that we want is stuff that is email that we actually have a domain for. sophiestoybox.com and sophiestoybox.net, as we specified before. Okay, so we're going to say only the list below. If you selected this is now configuring yourself as an open relay, and you definitely don't want that. Okay, so only the list below. If you have exceptions, let's say that you have certain servers that you need to add within here, well, you'd click on add, and then you'd add a certain server. You may have a server, another Exchange server that's going to relay through this one, and you'll see an example of this when we go into the SMTP relay section later in this video. One more setting down below. Allow all computers which successfully authenticate to relay regardless of the list above. What this checkbox is allowing you to do is say, okay, nobody can relay unless they can prove to me that they have a valid username and password in our domain. Okay, and this checkbox would be used in a situation like we described before, where we have that remote user who's traveling in hotels, and they want to be able to send email out using SMTP. Well, if you've ever been in that situation before, what happens a lot of times, if you try to send an email out, you're not able to do so from your hotel because they don't allow you to just send SMTP emails out through their SMTP server. So what you have to do is have a valid SMTP server that you can actually relay your email through. In order to do that, you're going to have to authenticate to this server, and that's what this is basically allowing you to do here. So this will then allow you to send email from a remote location like a hotel out to anybody on the internet like you normally would. Now, we're not using this in our organization. Right now, Sophie's Toy Box Company does not have any remote users using POP3 who need to use an SMTP server. So I'm going to deselect this, okay, because we don't need it, and this is just adding another layer of security. We then click OK, and we're all set here on this tab. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of information in here. Try to soak up as much as you can, and then review this whenever you get a chance, just to pick up the pieces on the little things that you may be missing. Okay, our next tab, Messages. Now this is quite a bit of information here. I would say out of all the tabs, this one's probably the least important, the least to concern yourself with though. Going down the list here, first, if you select this, we can limit the message size. Okay, and by default, you see that it's roughly 4 megabytes, 4096 kilobytes, so roughly 4 megabytes. This is a pretty small message size, and I would recommend that if you do select this, make this a little bit higher, maybe twice or 3 times as high as this. Because if anybody sends an email that's greater than 4 megabytes, it's going to be blocked. In addition to that, you don't have to set the setting here. You can also set these settings on an organizational level, okay, and that's done within System Manager, and we'll take a look at how to do that. Or you can set these on an individual user level. So, long story short, I think I would just avoid setting these settings here at all. Okay, limit session size. This refers to the actual session that you form anytime you're sending email. So maybe you have just one email, an individual email that's 4 megabytes, but the entire emails that you're sending, maybe you're sending out multiple emails at one time, is greater than this 10 megabyte threshold. Okay, so the session is the actual connection that you've established, and then how many emails. It's adding up all the emails together as far as size is concerned to determine whether or not you've crossed this threshold. Once again, let's just leave this unselected. I don't think it's an important setting to make in this location. Limit number of messages per connection. You connect to this SMTP virtual server, how many messages can you send at one given time? So this is another thing to consider. You may form one connection, and then maybe you have 50 emails. Offline, you're working at home, and you composed 50 different emails. You connect back to the Exchange server. What's going to happen, instead of it sending all 50 of them in one connection, it's going to form 3 different connections, send 20 in one, 20 in another, and 10 in a third connection. This is actually a good thing, because what it's doing is it's boosting the performance of your Exchange server, because now you're able to send emails in 3 different connections. All of them can kind of be going at the same time. Okay? If this is not affecting you, let's say that email performance seems to be working pretty well, I wouldn't change this setting. Next, we have limit number of recipients per message. 64,000 is an enormous number. I don't know where they got this from, but this, if you're sending out an email, let's say to a mass list, it's limiting you at 64,000. I would recommend you set this much, much lower. I don't think it'll probably be a problem if you didn't change it, only because most people rarely send emails out to distribution lists that are this large. To protect your organization from something like this, though, you may want to limit this. I mean, even if you put 1,000 in here, imagine sending a mass mailing out to 1,000 people at one time. You can imagine that this number may be sufficient for most organizations. Now, the one exception I can think of is a situation like a email marketing type company. Us, for example, we'll send out emails to mass amounts of people at one time, legitimate email. We're sending out sales messages advertising our new products. So we have a list that's roughly 10,000 people, so this would limit us from actually sending this list out to all 10,000 people at once. if you're working for a company and you actually send email through your own Exchange server, okay, and why I say that is because normally Train Signal and other companies will use a list server, a dedicated company to send emails instead of using their own resources. If you do it yourself, though, in-house, you will have to worry about this setting. Okay, we're going to leave it at 1,000 here, and we're going to move on. Non-delivery reports. These come up, and we'll get more information on this when we get over to the delivery tab. Non-delivery reports are going to come up anytime somebody sends an email message out and it just can't be delivered internally to a client. Basically, what we want to know is, where do we send non-delivery reports to? And you don't have to put anything in here. Maybe you don't want to see this information at all, but it also might be helpful for you to track down any sort of bad activity that might be going on your Exchange server. So for example, I'm going to put in here postmaster at sophystoybox.com. And the reason I'm doing this, well, I want to know that if somebody keeps sending email messages, maybe 1,000 email messages are sent to Brian at sophystoybox.com, and this user Brian doesn't exist, this non-delivery report, I mean, maybe there's something sneaky or suspicious going on in there. I want to see what's going on, so I can have NDRs, non-delivery reports, sent out to the postmaster account, and then take some proactive actions before they bring our server down. Now, bad mail directory. This is important as well, and this is something kind of on the same lines as we were talking about here. This is something that you want to monitor from time to time. This directory, you can see, is located in Program Files, Exchange Server, Mail Route, VSI1, and then within Bad Mail. Okay? And what this is, anytime somebody sends email, let's say they send an email to Craig at sophystoybox.com. Well, Craig's not a registered user. He's not a user within the company. So the email is then sent back to whoever sent it. Well, if that user that we send the email back to, if that email address doesn't work for some reason, well, now we kind of have this piece of mail that's floating around, and instead of just disintegrating it, we're going to make a record of this and actually store this information in the bad mail directory. Now, this is important because you have somebody who's trying to do some sort of denial of service attack or some sort of other, evil activity on your server. You want to know about it and, once again, take some proactive actions. Okay, our queue directory, we can leave this at the default. This is just where the email queue is operating from. And then we have here forward all mail with unresolved recipients to host. So in this case here, we got something similar to above. Actually, this is different now that I'm looking at it closer. In this situation here, let's say that you've got a situation where, once again, we'll use the Craig at sophystoybox.com example. Somebody sends an email in to Craig at sophystoybox.com, and there's not a mailbox for Craig on this Exchange server. Well, maybe you have another Exchange server that's not affiliated with our organization, or maybe you have a different vendor mail server, like SendMail from Unix. You can set up a SendMail server, which is the equivalent of Exchange server, and that would be set up in Unix or Linux. So maybe you would forward that over to that particular server. Okay, so maybe that host name is sendmail at .sophystoybox.local. So this would have to resolve to an IP address, and then this email then, any email that's not resolved here locally is going to be sent over to that other mail server that we may have on our network. Okay, we're going to leave this blank because we don't have this, and this is what you should do if you don't have a situation like I just described. Okay, the delivery tab. Now this one's chock full of information. You see we've got a lot of settings up here, and then down below we've got even more. So we'll go through this and we'll try to make everything make sense to you. So we'll go through it slowly but surely. First off, up top we're dealing with message delivery here, and outbound refers to email that comes from the outside. So imagine internet or email is sent from the internet, joe at AOL.com again. It comes into the SMTP virtual server, and now what's going to happen here is this email is going to be delivered into the internal client. What happens if that mailbox is not available for some reason? Let's say that the Exchange server, maybe it exists on a totally different server, and it's just not available. This is how long we're going to wait before we retry sending that message again, 10 minutes by default. If it's not available after 10 minutes, we're going to wait another 10 minutes before we go through our third attempt, and this is the second retry or the third attempt to send this email. If that doesn't work, 10 more minutes, and then after that we're going to wait 15 minutes, and every 15 minutes we're going to wait to send this email. Okay, are we going to try to send this email again every 15 minutes for how long? That's determined by the expiration timeout. Okay, down here you see it's 2 days. So we try sending the initial email, then we wait 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes over and over and over again until we reach this 2-day threshold. And if this time we still have not been able to deliver that email, at that point we're going to send the non-delivery report, NDR, back to the person who sent that email. Now the delay notification, this comes 12 hours into this whole situation. Let's say 12 hours in after this email has been received by the SMTP virtual server, the email still has not been sent. We're going to send a notification back to the person who sent the email and let them know the message still has not been delivered. Okay, so every 12 hours. So after 24 hours are up, another delay notification will be sent. All right, local. Now we're dealing with local settings, so email that's sent from one user in Sophie's to another user. By default, we're going to keep retrying because in that situation, you've got live active connections, you've got a local area connection we're dealing with, so the connection's going to appear, or the email is going to appear as soon as a connection is established by either of those clients. So Bob Bass sends an email over to Frank Bullhead. Bob's going to send the email. Maybe Frank's not online or something, maybe his mailbox is offline for some reason. As soon as his mailbox is brought back online, the email is going to be delivered to it. Okay, that's the way that SMTP and Exchange work. The delay notification, though, still works and comes into play here because after 12 hours, if the email still has not been delivered to Frank Bullhead, Bob's going to be notified so he at least knows that this email, has not been sent. Now this is kind of long for an internal email. A lot of times if you send an email out to somebody, you expect them to receive it almost instantaneously. And maybe it's something that's important and you're concerned that they haven't gotten back to you. So you may want to set this to a much shorter time period, and you can see that you can set it at minutes, hours, or days. I think minutes might be a little bit too short, but maybe even you set this to 1 hour. So at least the person knows that that person did not receive the email after 1 hour. Okay, now this is probably a little bit too extreme, but just to show you, the point of why you might want to set this a little bit lower. Okay, and this might be a pain in the butt if somebody sends an email, maybe you have a mailbox down for a full 24 hours. They're going to get a delay notification every hour for 24 hours. Okay, so let's bump this up a little bit. Let's set it at 3 hours. Expiration timeout. How long are we going to try delivering this message before we just destroy it and say, okay, we give up, we're not going to get this delivered? 2 days is the default. 2 days works out okay, I think. You can set this shorter or longer, of course, but we'll leave the default in this case. All right, moving on. Outbound security. Outbound security. Now let's take a look here. Let's step back. I just clicked this, and we got this anonymous basic integrated screen. And if I go back over here to access, I've got a very similar looking screen here also dealing with authentication. And it's real important that you differentiate. Okay, this is basically acceptable authentication methods for this resource, and this is dealing with internal users inside our organization. When we go over here to delivery and we say outbound security, now we're dealing with people coming into our network. Okay, outbound security. Now, this seems kind of extreme here. A lot of Exchange administrators will see this and go, wow, anonymous access? This is very, very insecure. I've got to change this right away. I want something more secure like integrated Windows authentication. Okay, that's a no-no. This should definitely be set at anonymous access. And the reason is because outside SMTP servers are going to communicate with this Exchange server. That's the only way that you can receive email. Remember, when Joe at AOL.com sends you an email, let's just say he's sending it to Bob Bass at sophistoybox.com, that email goes from the AOL SMTP server, and it's sent from there internally into the Sophie's Toybox SMTP server here, Exchange 1. So if we have integrated Windows authentication enabled, Exchange 1 is going to expect the AOL SMTP server to authenticate against it, and it's not going to have this, and the email is going to bounce back. Okay, so you have to leave anonymous access here. Don't be concerned if you have your security in place. Nobody's going to be able to get into your machine and be able to send email to you that's not supposed to be sent here. Okay, consider a couple settings. Number one, this is going to allow just the authentication process to occur. So your machine's basically going to go, okay, I'll let you form a connection to me. I'll let you send me an email. It looks at the email. Before it does anything with that email, consider back here on this Access tab again, we set these relay restrictions. Okay, since we have only the list below enabled, it's going to look at that email, and if this email is destined for anybody but our local domains, sophystoybox.com, sophystoybox.net, sophystoybox.local, we're going to bounce the email, okay, and we're just going to drop it right there. We're not going to forward that out back over the internet. Make sure this setting is selected here, though. Okay, so back over here again, outbound security, you got to leave this at anonymous access, otherwise you're not going to be receiving email from the outside. Now, the reason you may want to change this to basic or integrated Windows authentication would be if you're in a situation where you only want email, maybe inter-office. You've got two Exchange servers that are directly communicating with each other. Well, you could set them up to integrate or to authenticate to each other only using this type of authentication. And that's acceptable. That'll work. Okay, I'm going to click Cancel here because we made no changes. And now we're going to Outbound Connections. Couple settings here. You don't really need to mess with these, but you can limit the number of connections coming into your Exchange server. Here you see it's 1,000 by default. The timeout is set at 10 minutes. You can limit the number of connections per domain. Okay, so a little bit more granular setting. And the domain could be, AOL.com, any domain. And you can also limit the control the TCP port that it's listening at. I recommend you leave all of these settings alone. There's no reason to change them. If you start running into issues possibly where your server is just not able to respond, maybe you've got a low-end server with not that much memory, the CPU's not powerful enough, and you find that, yeah, you can service 1,000 people, but your Exchange server is so slow that people aren't getting their email efficiently. In that case, you may lower this so maybe only 100 people can connect to it at any one given time. Okay, we're going to leave the default settings here, so I'm just going to put that back in, or click Cancel. It'll accomplish the same thing. Last button, okay, Advanced. Once again, you probably won't be messing with this too much, except for the Smart Host setting that we're going to take a look at here a little bit later in this video. Maximum hop count, you can adjust this if you find that a lot of your messages are bouncing, and within the error message you see that the maximum hop count has been violated. Well, then you may boost this number up. I don't think you're going to come across that too much, and if you're not familiar with the hop count, it's referring to the number of routers that particular email crossed. This is so if you don't have a maximum hop count in place, emails could just bounce all over the place, and you have some sort of routing loop. These emails could be bouncing around forever theoretically. Okay, so the maximum hop count will allow up to 30 bounces through routers before it finally says, you know what, we're not finding this domain efficiently, I give up. Here's your message back again. Okay, so leave this setting alone. If you run into problems, you see error messages such as that, then you may want to run traceroute or some other diagnostic tools. Try to isolate your problem or boost this number up just to control those NDRs that are coming back. All right, masquerade domain. You can use this if you want to change the actual NDR domain that people are seeing the email come from. So if I don't want them to see sophystoybox.com, I could put in something else here. Not too important of a setting. Fully qualified domain name. If you want to change this, let's say that you don't want this to be the fully qualified domain name that this machine resolves to, you can do that. You can set up some other DNS name. You'd have to set this up within your forward lookup zone and then go and set that as well. But not too useful to us right now. We're going to leave this at the default setting. Smart host. This is what we're going to use to basically connect to our SMTP relay server. So I'm going to put off the discussion of the smart host until the next section of this video because we're going to talk about that extensively there. Perform reverse DNS lookup on incoming messages. In this way, you could actually do this and kind of verify where these messages are coming from. Does the domain match the IP address? You can do it. The problem with doing it is it's very, very CPU intensive, and it's going to really degrade the performance of your Exchange server. So I would recommend that you don't do that. Let's control our security in other ways. Okay, configure external DNS servers. Kind of an interesting setting, and I see some administrators mess with this. If you click configure here, you can add external DNS servers that this SMTP virtual server will work with. Yes, you can do it, but in our situation, think about how we have DNS set up. First off, if we go over to our network properties, which we don't have on this computer for some reason, we're going to have to Get our My Network Places icon in place here. Okay, let's try that one more time. So we go to the network properties. Here's our network card. When I go to the properties here, my DNS is configured pointing internally into the local machine. This is how I want my DNS server setting on this Exchange server. Okay, and it's able to send email out to the internet because the DNS server has records in place that point it out to the internet. In some situations, you'll be working with a Exchange server or an SMTP gateway machine that you don't want to configure to talk to the internal DNS servers. And what you can do is actually add DNS information right here just by entering in that public IP address. It's going to be a public DNS server that you're going to be working with as well. If you start setting stuff here, though, this is going to wreck your settings that we just saw in My Network Places. So let's say that I'm trying to be smart and I read an article and it says, put in a public IP address here. This is how you configure it. Whatever reason we didn't get that, let's try again. There we go. So I add this IP address here, click OK, save my changes. This DNS setting is actually going to take precedent over my local setting. Now what's going to happen is my Exchange server is not going to be functioning correctly within Active Directory, and I'm going to have issues. So stay away from this setting unless you have special circumstances that require your Exchange server or your SMTP gateway to be directly configured and connected out to a public DNS server. Okay, and typically this is only going to be the case when your machine is not part of the domain. If your machine's part of the domain, then it's very important that it points to the local DNS server for your local domain, sophistoybox.local in our case. Okay, so if you have an Exchange server, more likely your SMTP gateway server, if that's not part of the domain, in those cases, then you can use this setting and you're not going to run into any issues at that point. Okay, so I'm going to click OK here. We didn't make too many changes, but I know we made a couple, so we're going to save those changes. And that runs us through the settings, like I told you, a lot of settings for that default SMTP virtual server. One more thing we're going to look at before we actually exit out of this screen and go back to our notes is, well, actually a couple things. One is how to set up an additional SMTP virtual server. Okay, and you can do that by right-clicking here and just going to New SMTP Virtual Server. Really simple wizard here. I'm just going to type in a name, test. Select the IP address for this virtual server. We only have one. Okay, then I click finish. And right here it gives us something interesting. This combination of IP addresses and port number is already in use. The virtual server will not start if the combination is not unique. Okay, you can change the IP address now or change the IP address or port number after the virtual server has been created. So you don't want to do this. I would recommend that you don't do it. I just did it right now. You can see here that it has this weird icon there. This virtual server is not going to work at the present time because if we go in here and look, it's using the exact same IP address and port number as the other virtual server. Okay, so it's going to cause problems. One of these is not going to function correctly, or both of them, so stay away from doing that. If you need an additional SMTP virtual server, you have to set up an additional IP address or a different port number. That's going to depend upon how you're using it. Okay, the last thing to show you right now is the fact that in Exchange 2003 they have a new feature called Internet Mail Wizard. And you can use this if you're not really sure about those SMTP settings that we went through. This wizard is really designed to walk you through and help you out getting your SMTP server set up correctly and securely. Now what I don't like about it is some of the settings still require you to have a decent amount of knowledge, and if you have that amount of knowledge, I think you might be better off just going into the properties like we were just looking at. Okay, so here are some things. It's kind of helping you out if you're not sure about this other stuff. We've covered this already though, so you're going to be an expert at this without reading through this. Click Next. Now it's going to go through and it's going to ask which server we want to configure, and then it's going to tell us why we cannot run the wizard. Okay, and we may run into problems because it says can't be on 5.5 or earlier versions. Cannot run the wizard on Exchange servers that are part of a cluster, part of a network load balancing cluster, have multiple network interface cards configured with separate networks. Okay, looks like we're going to be okay. If I click Next here, it's actually running a prerequisite test on my server, and it tells us here, here's the report. The selected server passed the prerequisite test. So, okay, we can run this wizard. If you go through here, It's going to let you just basically, it's going to dumb down some of these options and ask you what you'd like to do. Select the appropriate options. Do you want to receive and send internet email? Of course. So I click next. Oops. SMTP's virtual server default is already using port 25, so I run into a problem right here. Okay, I'm not going to go through this wizard completely right now. We're not able to actually get through the whole thing, but this can be used. It's an alternative. The only thing that it's doing is it's asking you questions in semi-layman's terms here, checking boxes. When you get to the end and you click finish, the net result is it's going in and it's configuring the settings on your default SMTP virtual server that you see, just like we just got done doing. Okay, let's go take a look at our notes here and see what we've got next on the slate. And so far we've covered SMTP virtual servers, we took care of the SMTP settings, and we just got done with creating a new SMTP virtual server. So now what we're going to do is take a look at the Postmaster account. Kind of a little bit off topic here, but we mentioned it earlier in this video series, and I want to make sure that we do cover it. So let's go take a look at this default Postmaster account and how to set this. And it's not really a big deal. I guess we should introduce it a little bit right now, or reintroduce it. Remember, the Postmaster account is important because this is where all non-delivery reports are sent from. So if a non-delivery report or any sort of failed message is sent back to somebody who sent an email to Sophie's Toy Box, it's going to be addressed from the Postmaster. Okay, now if the Postmaster account is not set up or not checked, then people may be sending email into the Postmaster and it's never checked. Okay, so those issues are never addressed. Customer service issues are never addressed in that particular regard. So what we're going to do is create the Postmaster account and actually set this up for one of our users, Bob Bass. So we're going to connect back over to Exchange Server. It's really quite a simple task, actually. We're just going to open up Active Directory. And the way we have it set up right now, what we want to do is check, by default, the person who installs Exchange Server, and it was done using this user account, this person's actually set up with the Postmaster account, and I don't remember if it's still set on this account or not. We may have erased that before. We have not. Okay, so you can see that the Postmaster was set up, but it was set up to be sent at sophistoybox.local, so it's not going to do us much good anyway, because this is not routable over the internet. .local is not a valid internet domain name. I'm going to go ahead and remove this setting. It's really not necessary here locally. Okay, and then click OK on my account. And now we're going to go to Bob Bass's account. I do want to check the administrator. It looks like he's got no email address set up whatsoever. He does not. And that's okay, because we don't really need administrative email. This is just a default administrator account at this point. What we're going to do, go take a look at Bob Bass's account here quickly. Take a look at his email addresses. Okay, and you can see right now that Bob Bass has just his typical email addresses here. If we want to add additional email addresses, we may have looked at this earlier on, but if Bob Bass is in charge of HR, or we want him to get resumes or Postmaster information, it's simple enough. We can just click New SMTP address and then type in HR at sophistoybox.com. Okay, so now what's going to happen when we set up a new email address like this? Any email that's sent to hr@sophistoybox.com is going to be thrown into the same mailbox. All of these email addresses here are delivered to the same mailbox, and this is going to be the default mailbox that Bob Bass opens up every time he opens Outlook. Okay, so that's an important concept to contrast against what we're going to talk about next. Okay, and that is now setting up this Postmaster account. What we're going to do is we're going to use this default administrator account kind of as our catch-all account. So currently there's no email address associated with the account, but I'm going to go into Exchange Tasks, and I'm going to create a mailbox for this administrator, and we'll leave the default alias and let it generate all of those different names. And you're going to see here in a second, after the email addresses have refreshed, that it's going to get all of the email addresses that are defined in our recipient policies. And that's okay. Most people aren't going to be sending email to the administrator anyway. What we want to do is just set it up to work with the Postmaster and the Webmaster account, so then all emails delivered to this administrative account. So we'll give it a second here. It looks like it's done its trick. Go over to the email addresses tab, and now we see that we have administrator at sophistoybox.com as well as administrator at sophistoybox.net. I believe we had one additional configured. It probably just has not propagated to this account yet. What we're going to do though is click New SMTP address, and I'm going to make this person the postmaster at sophystoybox.com. Okay, click OK, and you see that it's now been added to this administrative mailbox. Now, if you're using this .NET one and you're getting a lot of email, you want to do the same thing here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Postmaster at sophystoybox.net. Okay, as a repeat, the only reason why we have these double domain names, for some reason Sophie's Toy Box Company felt like they were getting traffic to both .com and .net. They wanted a presence with both, so they just set up all their users with both .com and .net. This isn't necessary in a normal organization. It's just a preference they had at Sophie's Toy Box. Okay, so you see that we've got both Postmaster accounts set up. The next thing we want to do is worry about our Webmaster account. So we do the exact same thing. I'm just going to set up Webmaster at sophystoybox.com. Okay, and then we're going to set up Webmaster at sophystoybox.net. Now, the only reason that I'm really using this Webmaster account right now, it is a common administrative account, and I had mentioned it in an earlier video. This Postmaster account, this is really the most important account and the one we were referring to a little bit earlier in this video, and that's the account where the non-delivery reports are sent, and it's real important that you have this configured so these messages are actually sent back to somebody. If you don't have a Postmaster set up, then all those messages are going to bounce back to the user who sent them to the Postmaster, and it just is unprofessional and it's lacking customer service. Okay, so we've set this up right now. We've got our Postmaster set up. Now what we can do is just click OK to save all these changes. Okay, now our last problem that we have, now we set these up for this administrator account. The only problem is, remember, this isn't referring to a user. This is just a general account that was set up within the domain. Nobody logs on and checks the email as this administrator. So all sorts of email is going to start massing in this administrative mailbox to the Postmaster, and it's just going to go unanswered anyway. So what we need to do is assign this email to somebody, and that's really what we've done earlier, very similar. We just need to log on as Bob Bass and give him the ability to actually access that mailbox. Okay, so it's the exact same duplicate of what we have done in the previous videos. Okay, and that's just to give Bob Bass permission to this administrative mailbox, allow him to send as this administrator, and then set that mailbox up within his Outlook client. If you're not sure how to do that, refer back to the last video on Outlook. It's in the part 2, video 3 part 2, and it walks you through all the steps necessary to accomplish that task. Okay, we're now moving forward. We're going to start talking about our SMTP relay setup. Okay, so first thing, let's take a look at an overview of exactly what an SMTP relay is, and then we're going to take a look at how to set up this whole procedure. All right, first off, let's actually refer to this diagram. What we're going to do is actually put an additional server, it's this server right here, onto our network. And in our case here, we're just naming it SMTP1. Now you see that we already have our default server, Exchange1. That's the server we were just working on. This is where all the email is going to be stored, or is stored, and is going to be continued to be stored. So this is where you have all the hard drives and all the email basically masses up on this server. Then we have client machines over here that of course will access the email and just pull it, down and send email through the Exchange server. Here's our NAT server. This is the machine that we added in the last video. But this machine right here is a new machine, and what it's set up to do is basically filter all the email that goes out of sophystoybox.com and all the email that comes into sophystoybox.com. Okay, and the advantage of doing this is you first off take a lot of the processing burden off of the Exchange server. Okay, to actually look at the email, analyze the email, decide whether or not it's legitimate email, whether or not it should be delivered, whether or not it has spam, whether or not it has a virus, all that stuff adds up, and it costs a lot of processing power for the machine where it sits. So to do that, in addition to its normal email duties, can be too much burden for one single Exchange server. So what this machine is going to do is sit in between these two machines. So this Exchange server is going to forward all email to SMTP1, and then SMTP1 is going to it's got routing set up like it normally would, the default gateway, so it just sends those emails off through NAT1 onto the internet. Another advantage that you can use with SMTP1, the processing power, it also does filtering. On this machine we can set up, and we're going to do this later on in this video, install a third-party tool called GFI Mail Essentials. It's going to filter for viruses. It's also going to filter for content. So it's going to be looking for certain things. Maybe you don't want people in your company sending email relating to fantasy football or to gambling, anything else. You can use this tool to actually block email. It's going to check attachments, subjects, and the full message body as well. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other advantages of using an SMTP relay server. Number one, we talked about this already, but it increases security by preventing internet SMTP servers from directly contacting the Exchange server. Okay, so it's going to increase security because now our Exchange server does not have to go out to the internet and talk to these SMTP servers. And the external, the internet SMTP servers are not going to be talking directly to the Exchange server. We've got this, hardened, secured, locked down basic box that's only going to be the only one talking to these internet SMTP servers. We talked about this next one as well, can filter inbound email for viruses or spam before they reach the Exchange server. That's a good thing. You'll save a lot of time and headaches on that Exchange server. Can filter outbound email for viruses before they're sent out over the internet. This can be important in a situation where you have like a NIMDA, some sort of worm outbreak, where email, maybe somebody within the company gets a virus and sending out thousands of emails over the internet. Well, this tool that we're going to install actually is going to filter out viruses, and it uses 4 different virus engines, and it's going to scan all outbound email to ensure that no viruses are being sent out over the internet. Okay, decreases the workload on the Exchange server by taking care of CPU intensive tasks before forwarding the email onto the Exchange server. And that's, the CPU intensive tasks are what we're talking about up here. And then lastly, can be configured to provide a secure SMTP server so that your remote users can send email over the internet when they're out of the office. This is going back to earlier in this video. We talked about the scenario where we have users who are traveling in hotels who have POP3 accounts. Maybe they need to send email from that hotel and they don't have an SMTP server that they can use, so you have to provide them one within the company. Well, you can set up this setting on this actual SMTP relay server so now they can use that server to actually forward their email out over the internet. It's much more secure than actually enabling and configuring that on the Exchange server itself. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look then. We looked at this diagram. Let's take a look at another diagram just to give you a feel for how this SMTP server is going to work. When we're dealing with outbound email, okay, in our scenario here, Bob Bass is going to be sending email out to jim@aol.com. Okay, so our scenario basically, first Bob sends an email out, it's sent to the Exchange server. We're going to configure the Exchange server so all email is going to be forwarded to SMTP1. SMTP1 will forward it out to the NAT server, and the message is delivered as normal to jim@aol.com. Okay, so really the only change from the norm is instead of the Exchange server sending it directly to NAT1, now we're sending it through the SMTP server first. Legitimate inbound email. Okay, Jim sends an email into Bob Bass. The email comes in over the internet through the NAT server. The NAT server is going to redirect, and this is a setting we're going to have to change. It's going to redirect this email here internally into SMTP1. SMTP1 is going to scan that email, make sure there's no viruses, assuming we install this program on there. It's going to filter it based upon any restrictions we put in there. Once it determines that the message is clean, it's then going to deliver that message to Exchange 1, and Exchange 1 will deliver the message then into Bob Bass. Here's an example of a spam message sent inbound. Okay, in this scenario, what's going to happen is the spammer sends an email over the internet, okay, and this spammer is sending a message to, let's say, jim@aol.com. So computer's in the same place down here, but now it's a different user. It's not Jim, it's just some spammer somewhere else in the world. Okay, so it sends the message, and what they're attempting to do is relay this message, and it's meant to go through the NAT server, through SMTP1, back through NAT1, out into the internet, and then let's say that Jim exists over here now. Okay, so here's Jim, And what they want to do is send some sort of spam here out the gym advertising free Rolexes or something like that. So spammer sends the message, comes in through NAT1, reaches SMTP1. When this machine sees that email and sees that it's addressed to jim@aol.com, it goes, wait a second, I only service sophiestoybox.local, sophiestoybox.com, and sophiestoybox.net. That's not a legitimate email. I'm going to block it. And that email then is blocked right there. Okay, that's that SMTP relay setting that we were looking at before that I had stressed to you that you make sure that you set correctly. Okay, this is basically what this diagram is referring to. Okay, let's take a look at how we can do this. We're going to form a remote desktop connection over to SMTP1. Okay, we've already got this set up here, so we're going to automatically log on, and this machine is actually already joined to the domain. We're going to go through these settings here, but we're logged on right now as the domain administrator of sophiestoybox.local. Okay, so settings. Let's take a look at the TCP/IP settings here quick. IP address is just 150, okay, same network ID. This is just on the same network as the rest of the machines. Default gateways pointing out to NAT1. DNS is pointing locally, okay, it's important that you realize that. It's also pointing here locally. Okay, after that, we've joined this machine to the domain. You can see that here. We look here, it's smtp1.sophiestoybox.local. So it has been joined. Make sure that you update this machine. Okay, this is going to be the one machine now that's in contact with those Exchange servers out in the internet. So you want to make sure that you fully update this machine. This machine has been updated. Service packs, hot fixes, whatever it is, make sure that it gets fully patched up. Okay, what we're ready to do now then is actually install SMTP first. Okay, and to do this, we need to install, and by the way, we didn't go over this before, but an SMTP relay server does not require Exchange server. We're just going to go through Internet Information Services and install SMTP here. And it kind of acts as a router in a sense, where it's just routing information from the NAT server to the Exchange server, from the Exchange server to the NAT server out into the internet. Okay, so that's what it is. It's a go-between. It's not storing email at all in this machine. It's not a final resting point of email. It's just passing it back and forth. Okay, let's go ahead and configure this. To do this, we need to go into Control Panel and then Add or Remove Programs. We're going to go to Add Remove Windows Components. And then within the Windows components, this component actually is a piece of the Internet Information Services 6.0, which is found within Application Server. Don't install the entire thing. That's not a secure configuration. Double click or single click this and go in the details. Okay, furthermore, we don't see SMTP here. It is buried within Internet Information Services. So let's go ahead and open this up. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to go ahead and select SMTP. And you see that this also is selected by default. Okay, if I select it again, okay, that's selected. And common files are also selected. Okay, common files are common. They need to be installed. And this is the management tool that you're actually going to be managing SMTP from. Click OK. Click OK again. Next. Probably going to need your installation CD here. So we'll pause this video while I throw this in here and we'll start it right back up. Okay, just took a second there. Now it's installed. So I'm going to click Finish. And we've got that all taken care of. Alright, so we can close this. And what we're going to do now is go ahead and open up Internet Information Services here, which then that's located within Administrative Tools here. So you see that we have Internet Information Services Manager. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And what we're going to do here is just take a look quickly. Normally this is where we manage our full-blown web server from. Well, now the only piece that we have within the snap-in is the SMTP service. Okay, and it installs this default SMTP virtual server, which is the same thing that we were managing just a few minutes ago on Exchange One. If we right-click this and go to Properties, these tabs and these different boxes should look familiar because it's really almost identical to what we saw before. Okay, let's go ahead and cancel this out then, and now let's go through the process of getting this set up and installed. First thing that we need to do is go in here to Domains, and we need to right-click, go to New, and then select Domain. Now when we select this, what we're doing right now is we're adding a domain for any domain that's considered a local domain that we want to actually route email for. So in this case, we're going to be adding sophiestoybox.com and sophiestoybox.local. If you don't add these domains, what essentially is going to happen is your machine is going to make a decision on that relay choice, and we're not going to forward email for the necessary domains. So in a nutshell, any domain that you want to accept email for, which is going to be our local domains, you want to add a domain for here. So I'm going to click Next, and now I just need to type out the actual domain name. Okay, sophystoybox.com, and then we just click Finish. Now we're going to also add one for sophystoybox.net, just so we have some consistency here. And same thing, click Finish, and now we're all set with our local and remote domains. Okay, next step. Need to come over here to our actual domain, right click it, and then go to Properties. Okay, and we got to do a couple settings here. Number one, we need to select this box, and this is basically saying right here, allow incoming mail to be relayed to this domain. Very important setting. The first setting does no good. Creating this doesn't do any good until you actually select this. Now down below, we also want to select this, forward all mail to smart host, and this is where we're actually inputting the IP address of Exchange 1. Okay, and you can use a host name. Okay, so we could use exchange1.sophystoybox.local, but I think it's a better setting to use an IP address. It's going to be faster. But when you put it in an IP address, you have to make sure that you put it in brackets like you see right here. Okay, it's brackets. Another thing, it's real simple when you're going through this configuration to get confused and accidentally input the wrong IP address as we're going back and forth on these different machines. Double check, think through the process, make sure that you're inputting the proper IP address anytime you're putting this in. Okay, so you can see right here it's bracket IP address and then end bracket. This indicates to this SMTP relay service that this is an IP address and not meant to be a host name. Okay, you can click on outbound security if you want here. You do want to make sure this is left at anonymous access for the same reasons that we cited before. And that's so that any outbound or external SMTP server that's trying to contact and send email to us, they need to be able to communicate with us and send email. If we enable authentication, no external email from the internet is going to be accepted. Okay, the Advanced tab. Here we're not going to worry too much about this, but we have some advanced SMTP settings that you can use right here. So we're not going to go into this in this particular video. That's all that you need to do. So basically we just check this box and then input an IP address within brackets. From there we just click OK, and that domain has been set up. We also want to do the same thing for this particular domain. So we check this box, allow incoming mail to be relayed to this domain. Then down below we select this, forward all mail to smart host. This is going to be the exact same setting, but you do need to configure both of these. Oops, that's 100. Okay, 192.168.200.100. I'm going to double check this one. I want to make sure that I didn't do the same thing. No, I did that correctly. Now up top here you see smtp1.sophystoybox.local. This of course is the local machine. You see it right there. It's specified as local default. If we come in here, you see that it doesn't have the same property settings as the other ones. It just has a drop directory for just different information that may come into this SMTP relay server. Okay, so we don't need to do anything at all with this particular domain name. Okay, next thing we have to do. We need to come over here to our default SMTP virtual server. We're going to right click, go to Properties, and now up here, up top, we want to assign this IP address. Okay. By doing this, we're basically once again saying, here's the IP address that you're using. In case I assign additional IP addresses, this is the one that I'm configuring. You got to make sure that you're using this particular one. Okay, and on this setting here, we can go through and configure all sorts of different things if we want to. We can limit the number of connections if we need to. We can enable logging, which I recommended before and will again turn on. Come over here to access, authentication. We have anonymous here. We're going to leave that as the default setting. We could install a secure certificate. We can control the connection, relay settings. We've got to leave this as is. To make it more secure, we're going to deselect this option here, which is preventing anybody from authenticating. Okay, so nobody's going to be relaying through this server except, okay, and this is going to be important now, we're going to have to allow one machine to relay through this server, and that's now going to be Exchange 1. So we're going to have to actually add this machine here. Okay, 192.168.200.100. I click OK here. So now the only machine that's allowed to relay through here is our mail server, no other. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click OK here, and we're all set there. Other things, you can go through here and start assigning things if you want to. These are turned on. For some reason, by default, you've got these limits turned on. I'm going to turn these off. I'd rather control these within the Exchange server itself if I need to control them. Okay, so I'm going to turn those off. These we'll just leave alone for right now. Send copy of non-delivery report. We don't really need to do that here. That's going to be set on the Exchange server, so we'll let that go. We have different outbound retry intervals. If we want to set these differently to a different setting, we can do that. However, these settings probably aren't that important. These would come into play anytime this SMTP service was not able to reach the Exchange 1 SMTP virtual server. So for example, if SMTP 1 can't reach Exchange 1, it's going to wait 15 minutes before it tries it again, then 30, then 60, and then 240 minutes after that. Okay, we're not going to set these settings. We already have these taken care of on Exchange 1. LDAP routing, if we're using this, we're not using that. And then we have security configured within here if you need to actually grant permission to different users to manage this SMTP virtual server service. Okay, so that's all that we need to do right here. We're going to leave that setting there. Okay, and then from here we're going to go ahead and just click OK. Okay, I was double checking. I thought we had everything done here, but that looks good. We can now close this. We're done with our configurations here. Now we need to go back over to Exchange 1. On Exchange 1, we're going to go back into that default SMTP virtual server. Okay, and just so you're not confused, let me pull up a diagram here real quick. Okay, using our default diagram that we started with, what we've done up to this point in time, we've configured this particular server here. We're allowing anonymous connections right here. We're allowing anybody to send email in. And so far what we've done is enabled a smart host. So it's going to automatically connect over to this machine anytime it has email that needs to be delivered. Okay, now we're going over to Exchange 1, and on Exchange 1 we need to set it up so anytime email is received by Exchange 1 and needs to be routed out to the internet, it's going to send it this way. Okay, let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll connect back over to Exchange 1. We're going to open up the default SMTP virtual server properties, and then from here what we need to do is go to our delivery tab. We're going to go to advanced, and then in the smart host configuration area here, this is where we have to input the IP address of SMTP1, and once again this must be done in brackets. Okay, so I'm doing bracket 192.168.200.150 in bracket. Okay, the reason for brackets once again is because it's expecting to see a host name, something, and we're not going to put that in, we're just putting an IP address in here. Okay, so that's all that we have to do here. It's pretty simple. Click OK. Click OK again. All right, and if we want, we can stop and restart this. It should work without doing anything else. Now to test this, what I'm going to do is send a couple emails. We're going to come back over here to the desktop, and I'm just going to open up this email client here. We're logged on to this machine just as the administrator account, Scott A. Skinger, on this machine. So, oops. I'm going to go ahead and send an email outbound. We're going to try to send this out to an email account that I have out there on the internet. Okay, so this is the email address I'm going to send to. Let's try this out. Test to Scott's account. We're going to send that, see if that actually makes it through the SMTP relay server. Let's click send receive here a couple times and see if it bounces back. And now what I'm going to do is stop this video here momentarily. I'm going to go check on the email client on the internet side where this was sent to and send back a couple responses just to double check and see if this setting is actually working. Okay, that email was received on the internet client. So what we're going to do now here is just wait it out a little bit. And I sent two emails back. I sent a reply back to the email that was sent right here. That should come across as test from Scott, and there's a second one that's sent from a different internet client, just one of a different email address that I have. So we should see both of these coming across here in a second. I'm going to click send receive, see if we can speed up the process of these emails coming through, and here they are. Okay, here you see the test. This is the original response. I just sent a message to myself here indicating that I did receive the test. And then this message here is a new test from a different account. And this one's actually sent from sas-ta.com, a different domain name altogether. Okay, so fairly simple to set up here, and very, very important. Recommend that you go through the settings relatively slowly, make sure it's configured correctly, and all the security mechanisms are in place. Okay, we're going to start working on GFI Mail Essentials now. So we're going to connect back over to SMTP1, and this program's already been downloaded. But you can download a free evaluation of GFI Mail Essentials from gfi.com. We're just going to go out there real briefly. I want to show you two different products so there's no confusion here. Okay, at gfi.com, all right, finally. At gfi.com, they got a couple programs here. One is called Mail Essentials, and the other one is called Mail Security. GFI Mail Security, this particular tool has email antivirus, content checking, exploit detection, and anti-Trojan. This will be the program that we're actually working with. The Mail Essentials tool, this particular tool is used for anti-spam, disclaimers, mail archiving, and more, as it says here. Okay, so a good combination would be to install both of these. We're only going to worry about the critical stuff to us right now, and that is antivirus and content checking. Both of these programs rate out real high, though, if you go to third-party sites that evaluate these products. So they come highly recommended. We use GFI Mail Security here and are quite happy with it. Okay, so I've downloaded an evaluation copy of this. This is currently on the desktop, as you see right here. We're going to go through the installation and then some basic configuration of it as well. Okay, first things first. Click Next to start installation of GFI Mail Security. What we need to pay attention to here is a couple things. Number one, we have two different modes that GFI Mail Essentials can be installed in. One is VS API mode, and this is the way we did it in our Exchange 2000 videos because we installed this directly on the Exchange server itself. Okay, if we install this on another system, such as we're doing right now, we're automatically going to be installing it in SMTP gateway mode. Okay, so this is how we're going to install it. We're putting it right onto the SMT gateway itself. It does react a little bit differently. The options are slightly different. Okay, but for the most part, it's the same program. We've just decided, remember, to off-site basically all of the processing power, all of the hard work that the Exchange server had to do when we were working with 2000 onto our SMTP relay server at this point. So that's what we're going to do. Click Next, extract it to our temporary locations. Okay, and we're going to launch the executable right now. Fairly simple installation, but there are a couple key settings that we need to be aware of. So we're going to go through the whole installation just so you're comfortable with it. Okay, so right now, check for a newer build if we wanted to. If this is an old evaluation, we could do that. I just downloaded this, so we're going to leave this as it is. So we're not going to check for a newer build. We'll accept their license agreement. And then you see right here, our license key is the evaluation. Here's our first key setting. You want to make sure that you enter in your actual email address and not sophistoybox.local. And this is an important email address. You see that it says the administrator email address. Well, this is going to determine where all of the security messages are sent. For example, if somebody violates one of the content rules that you create, you're going to have to approve this before they can actually receive this email. This is going to be the email where that message is sent. So I would recommend that you actually think about creating a dedicated mailbox, okay, a dedicated mailbox specifically for all these messages. So we would have had to have done this ahead of time, and that would be similar to what we did with that sales mailbox we created a couple videos back. Just create a dummy user, call it GFI user if you want to, create a mailbox for it, and then it would generate an email address, and this would be the email address you'd specify here. We're going to leave my email address in. Remember, I'm acting as a consultant to Sophie's Toy Box. This is definitely not something that I would be doing as a consultant. This can be time consuming and laborious, and they wouldn't want to pay me big bucks just to filter through their email. So this would be typically delegated to possibly a manager, those sorts of things. Administrator possibly, most likely administrator or a manager though. Okay, so this email address, double check it, make sure that it looks right. It does. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Okay, from here, specify the IP address of the machine running the mail server and specify your local domain. So it's real important that you double check these settings. Our mail server is not at 150, but it's actually at 100, and it's listening on port 25, the default port. If you leave this default IP address in here, it's not going to work, so not a real good setting. Now, and specify your local domain. This could be your internet domain, or we could specify our actual Active Directory domain. We're going to leave our Active Directory domain configured here so we can utilize Active Directory users and computers when it comes time to setting up rules. Okay, does this server have access to all the email users in Active Directory? Yes, it does. Okay, so we're going to select this. And this is what I was just talking about a second ago. This will allow us to use rules based upon Active Directory users rather than having to use email addresses, which can be a lot more laborious. Okay, what mail server are you running? Exchange 55, Lotus Notes, or same as above, but we're using Exchange 2000 or 2003 as our email server. This is the option we want, so we're going to select it and click Next. Now it's just time to do the installation, so I click Next again, and the installation process is off and running. So fairly quick installation, but I'm going to stop the video while this is installing, and we'll start it right back up again. Okay, this screen popped up, and I think it's important to point out exactly what this is for. Basically, what GFI Mail Security wants to do is verify which domains are your local domains. And local domains to them basically mean you're receiving email for them. And we know that we've configured sophystoybox.com, sophystoybox.local, and sophystoybox.net. But this one actually, this is just pulled right from our gateway settings that we did before, smtp.1, sophystoybox.local. This we don't necessarily need to have in our local domains. We're going to leave this in here right now just to make sure that we get through the installation procedure fine. We can always manually remove this later on. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click Next and then Finish. Okay, so that's the installation process. Fairly straightforward. Now we're just going to go up and start taking a look at the tool itself. So we go to All Programs, GFI Mail Security, and then the actual piece that we want to open up is Mail Security Configuration. Okay, now it opens up, and by default you should know that GFI Mail Security really secures and locks down your SMTP gateway out of the box without doing much at all. In place already, we have Trojan and executable scanners. We have virus scanning engines. All four of these are available in the evaluation. When you buy the full product, I believe you get Norman and Bitdefender included with it, and then Kaspersky and McAfee can be purchased as separate engines. Now this is important because when you're working on a production network, it's important that you know about viruses as soon as possible. So if you have 4 different virus vendors all checking for viruses and updating their definitions at different times and with different settings, if you have 4 different virus engines, you're bound to catch that virus using 4 different ones rather than just, let's say, just one virus program. Now each of these, if you open up the properties of them, are configured to scan inbound and outbound emails. These ones in particular are not configured to check for macros. And if you look down below, it gives you the scanner engine version, binary version, signature date. Boy, do these things look out of date. If we go over here to updates, though, it does show that an update just took place. Okay, and by default, it's set to automatically check for updates every hour, and that's what you want. You really want this updating quite often, and you can do an update just by clicking on download updates now if you choose to do that as well. I'm going to say no just so we don't get tied down with doing a virus update, but each one of these engines should be completely up to date, and you want to make sure and confirm that they are, otherwise they're really not doing it any good. Okay, next thing you can do, move it down, move it up. This is kind of signifying which one has the highest preference value. Which engine are we going to be using first? So if all of them are configured and enabled, however, all 4 of them are going to be put into play anytime we're doing any virus scanning. Okay, now we're going to move forward into attachment checking, and this is also turned on by default. You have a default attachment checking rule. This was here. I didn't configure this ahead of time. You saw the program opened up for the first time. Now if we open up the properties here, we see that by default this default virus or attachment checking rule is checking inbound emails. So you have the choice of checking outbound emails as well, and you need to weigh out your decisions here. First off, what type of attachments are you blocking? And by default here we have the choice of blocking all attachments, just what's in the list, and you can of course add items to the list, or everything except what is in this list. So if you go down through this list, you're going to see common programs like EXEs and .coms, other things, Visual Basic scripts, those sorts of things, Windows scripting host. These are scripts and commonly contain viruses. Okay, so you don't want these types of attachments typically being received or sent through your network. Now, there is going to come times where you actually do send EXEs. We work with several companies that develop programs for us. So when they develop programs, and they send them via email, they send out EXEs to us. So these would be blocked by this default attachment checking rule. So what you need to do is carefully plan out everything that's going to happen. And as you can see, it's only blocking inbound emails right now. It's not blocking outbound emails. So does your company, do your users require EXE files? Are they going to be sending these over emails? You need to determine this. So what you can do is maybe as a default rule, you block all of these bad attachments, okay, bad extensions that would be associated with attachments. And then we can use this users folders list here. And if we have certain users who should be exceptions, well, then we can add those particular users. And the nice thing about this, because we have it configured to work with Active Directory, we can pick out specific users from Active Directory, and you can see now that they fill in directly in conjunction with Active Directory. Okay, so this is set up right now to block those bad attachments from this list from all users except for Bob Bass. Okay, other actions. Here, what do we do once they're blocked? Okay, block attachment and perform this action. Do we quarantine it? Do we just delete it outright? Or we delete the email altogether? Okay, so just delete the attachment or delete the email and the attachment. Or you can just move it to a folder and just kind of quarantine it in that way. You also have the option of notifying the user, notifying the user's manager, and then also logging this as well. Okay, so decent number of options there for sending this. Let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and leave these selected here. I'm going to click OK. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pause this video here momentarily. I'm going to send some inbound emails with attachments, and we're going to check these once I've sent them and just get a feel for what happens when we send these attachments. Okay, I sent those emails, and those were sent out to raymoray@sophystoybox.com. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our desktop here, and we're going to log on to XP1 as Ray Moray, and we'll get a feel for exactly what happens here. Okay, so we're going to use his default password. Okay, and we're just going to open up Outlook and let's see if we've received these attachments. Okay, both of these came through. You can see here's the first one, and I marked them new info, good attachment. And if we open this up, we see that we have the attachment here, Word document, no problem. We could go ahead and open this if we needed to. And then here's the second one. Okay, and this attachment actually made it through. If you look right here, really shouldn't have, but this was it's a zip file with an exe file within it. So if we open this right now, we can see that this is an actual exe file here. I'm going to go to the properties to show you this. Okay, so what we need to do first off, let's go back to our actual rule and check out and see what we might have done wrong, because for some reason it made it through here without actually blocking that attachment. Okay, so we're going to connect back over to SMTP1. Here's our default attachment checking rule once again. Let's go to the properties, and we have it set up to check. Select which files you wish to block. Block this list. EXE is included within it. Okay, actions, block attachment and perform this action. Quarantine the attachment. Okay, and then here, please select the users folders for whom this rule will apply. And it should be all the users except the list below. So it should apply to everybody except for Bob Bass. Since we sent this to Ray Moray, there's really no reason that this attachment should not have been blocked. What I'm going to do, because I sent it immediately after this rule was put into place, I'm going to go ahead and save this once again. Okay, click OK here. And now what I'm going to do is send those emails again. We'll double check it one more time. It just might not have been enabled yet. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and we'll be right back. Okay, in troubleshooting this problem, I figured out exactly what the issue is, and it has nothing to do with SMTP1. When we were going through this procedure before, we talked about setting up the NAT server, but we never did it. Okay, so what's happening right now, just to show you, we have this configuration in place, and this is what we're aiming to do. Well, email's coming in over the internet, And remember, we have that services and ports feature forwarding email from NAT1 directly to Exchange 1 bypassing this SMTP server. So what we need to do is actually set up our email so it's going to go from NAT1 to SMTP1. Now, email that's sent from the client is going from Exchange 1 to SMTP 1 based upon the settings that we configured here. We just need to change our NAT1 settings. Let's go take a look at how we do that now. It's a real quick change. Okay, so we'll form a remote desktop connection over to NAT1. We're going to have to go into routing and remote access here. Okay, and once that's open up, this is actually left over from the last time we opened it. We need to go into NAT1, IP routing, NAT basic firewall like you see here, and then select WAN. We're going to go to the properties of our wide area network configuration and then go down to services and ports. Okay, now this setting right here, SMTP, is still set to point directly to the Exchange server. Well, now we need to tell it that now you're talking to SMTP1, which is located at 150. Okay, so we're going to change this setting, click OK again, and now we should be able to have our email, everything traveling as we expected it to be previously. Okay, so we should now have the configuration that we were hoping to have in the first place, which is to have it go directly through SMTP1 before it then travels over to Exchange 1. Okay, let's go ahead and try this out. We're going to go ahead and send the email from the client machine on the internet like we had done before with the attachment. So it'll kind of be a 2-in-1 test. We'll get a real good feel for A, whether or not our NAT server is doing the job, okay, because we won't get the email otherwise, and then B, we'll also see if the GFI Mail Essentials tool is actually blocking the emails it's supposed to be. Okay, those emails have been sent, so what we need to do now is go over to Ray Moray's account over on XP1, and we'll double check his email account just to see if one, both, or neither one of those emails made it over. Okay, so we're logging on to XP1. This is Ray Moray's email account here. I'm going to go ahead and close it and reopen it. Make sure we don't have any issues there, and click Send Receive just to make sure we get the most up-to-date pieces of email. Now, one new email did come through, but as you see right here, it's the CD menu project, and this is just a normal Word document. Okay, this Word document here, this is just a normal document. There's nothing wrong with it. The attachment's not considered to be unsafe by GFI Mail Security. Okay, so what we can do now is actually go back over to the administrative account, and I'm going to show you a couple other things. Okay, so here we're sitting on our main machine here, and I'm logged on as the administrator. Now keep in mind when we first installed GFI Mail Security that I set up this account, Scott A. Skinger at sophystoybox.com, as the administrator of Sophie's Toy Box. So what's going to happen, any sort of notifications that are sent from GFI Mail Security are going to come internally right here into my email. Okay, and we've got a bunch of them already. This is notifying us right here that we've got new Bitdefender files, McAfee files, exploit files, so on and so forth. These are actually all sent directly into my junk email. Okay, so you may want to, with Outlook's aggressive sending stuff here, you may want to mark these as non-junk items. It's easy enough to do. I'm just going to do junk email and put add sender to safe senders list. Okay. And now you can do it what you want to do. And this is just really informative. You're not going to be doing much with these virus files at all. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and look at these real quick, show you what we have. New Trojan and executable scanner files have been downloaded and installed. All this is good news as far as we're concerned. All of our email viruses, all this stuff has been installed and updated. Okay, so automatically without us having to do anything. Now in addition here, we've also received a notification from GFI Mail Security letting us know that it received an attachment that met one of our attachment checking rules, basically. This contains an exe file, and now we have some choices on what to do with this. So there's all sorts of information here. You see who the sender was, who the recipient is. Okay, if we go down here, we see the name of the zip file. This is the actual name of the attachment. What happened to it? It's been quarantined, who the username is, who their email address is. Okay, the error message, it was triggered by this rule, default attachment checking rule. So this is nice. If you keep seeing a bunch of things that have been filtered, at least you know what rule is causing that filter, what rule is causing that filtering action to take place. So that's nice. Then it gives you more info. It's blocked because of this exe extension that's within that attachment. So now what you need to do is really look at this, and you can open up this attachment by taking a look here. If we want to open it up, we can check it out. You might want to look at all of these on a safe, secure computer that's somewhat disconnected from the internet. Maybe it's not even part of the domain. You could do it that way. And what's going to happen then, if you end up opening a virus, you're going to cause a lot less harm than you would if you open a virus on a machine that's not part of it. Okay, you have some choices here. You can approve, delete the body attachment and notify the user, delete the email, or delete and notify. Okay, so you're going to be deleting the email and then notifying the user. We're going to go ahead and approve this. So I'm going to click approve and then submit. Okay, and it just lets us know that it's successfully completed this action and it's all done. So we can close this here. And now what we're going to do is just close this out, and we'll close Outlook to clean up our desk a little bit. And we're going to connect back over to XP1. And here we're at Ray Moray's email account. We're going to click send receive. Let's see if this has come through yet. And it has. Here we see that this has actually come through now. If we open this up, the subject has actually been changed. It's been tagged with this particular header from GFI. No big deal. And then here we see that we have the full attachment, and we could open this exe up because it's been approved now. Okay, so pretty cool tool on how it works with those attachments. And remember, that's set up by default. So if you don't want that action to take place, you're going to have to go into that tool and make some adjustments. All right, the next thing we're going to do here, connect back over to SMTP1, and we're going to look at the content checking rule. Now, by default, there is no content checking rule. We do have a default one. You can use the default content checking rule, or you can create a new content checking rule. It really doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what it says here. If we take a look, there's really nothing in here except some default settings, but nothing has been set. And the content checking rule, what this does, it's actually going to check the content of the email. And you see here on the general tab, we can check the email body and attachments. Okay, and we can enter in keywords or conditions. And then this is going to check the actual email subject. Okay, so if we send a couple emails, we can test this out. Let's set this up first. So first decide what you want it to check. Do you want it to check inbound emails, outbound emails? We want it to select, check both of those. That's good. Content check email and body attachments. If you don't want this, just deselect it and this will all go away. We do want to check this though, so we're going to select this. Now I'm going to click keyword. Okay, and here within keyword, it kind of gives you some ideas of what you can put in there. So I'm just going to add keyword like gambling. You know, there's very few instances where you can think of where you want gambling included in the actual any sort of email. And yes, there's going to be exceptions. You know, you could talk about a certain salesperson gambling on what they said, and they ended up, closing the sale because of the gamble that they made. So you got to think about this. You can't just start throwing words in here and having all of your email filtered. There is some ramifications to what you're entering. Let's go ahead and test this out by using this word, though. So you can use keywords, or you can use what are called conditions, and this is basically going to combine keywords together. Okay, you may want to filter, for example, fantasy football, but if you enter in the keywords separately, it's going to block anything that has fantasy or football in it. Here what we can do, if we want these to just be blocked together as a certain phrase, we can do if fantasy and football. Okay, and maybe we want to add baseball in here too. So we could put a or in here even if we wanted to add that in. If fantasy and football or baseball, either one of these, okay, is within the, remember this is for the content check the email body. So if it's in the body of the email, okay, you see this right here, it's going to filter this out. So an email that just has fantasy or an email that just has football or baseball in it is not going to be blocked. An email that has both fantasy and football or baseball will be blocked. Okay, attachment checking, you can do the same thing within this rule, check these attachments, and you can add certain extensions. Okay, that's if you don't really want to mess around with a separate attachment checking rule. You could add that to this content checking rule as well. Okay, the subject, if you want to just focus on the subject, you can add words in the subject, and here you can put in things like, porn, Okay, anything you can think of that you don't want to appear in the subject, and some of them really stick out. It's hard to imagine how porn could appear in the subject of an email and be a legitimate email. So words like that will probably be okay. Adult, I don't know about it. I mean, there's probably a lot of adult subject lines that are perfectly legitimate emails within a company. Okay, so you can add those here. You can import. Okay, if you get some sort of text file, you can import that text file into GFI, so you can type this out yourself, or you can subscribe to services that will provide you words if you want to go about it that way. Okay, then actions. Block the email and perform this action. Do you want to just delete it altogether, or do you want to quarantine it? In most cases, you want to quarantine it. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to notify the user, okay, log it, notify the manager, and then whether or not there are any exceptions to the rule. Okay, we're going to leave this as it is, and we're going to try this out how we have it right here. So I'm going to click OK. And now remember, this has been disabled by default, so I'm going to have to come into this rule and turn it on by enabling it. Okay, what we can do now, let's actually do this internally and not go from the outside. Let's try this internally within our company network. So what I'm going to do here, we've got Ray Morey sitting on XP1. I'm going to open up Outlook Web Access here. And we're just going to connect on over to Exchange 1, but we're going to use Angelfish's account. Okay, so he's got to log on with his username and password. Okay. Okay, and you see right here we've now got a Outlook Web Access connection to Angelfish's mailbox. So we're going to conduct a new email, okay, and remember we didn't put anything in our subject, so we're just going to focus in on the body of the email. We'll send this over to Ray Morey. New info. Okay, and here we're just going to put in, did you hear about the new fantasy football league? Okay, now these two words should trigger this. So we're going to go ahead and send this message, and just to check some stuff out, we'll also create a new email. Okay, and this one we're going to go ahead and send out once again to Ray Morey. Okay, and with this email, we're going to go ahead within the subject line, we're going to type in fantasy football here to see if this works. Let's actually go into our global address list here. Okay, fantasy football, and then we'll click send. So did I send that last one to Ray Morey? Yeah, I did. Okay. Okay, so we sent out 2 emails. Let's go over to Ray Morey's desk now and see if he received either one of these emails. So, okay, so we're logging on to XP1 here. Here you see Angelfish's first email came through, and for whatever reason, did you hear about the new Fantasy Football League? This actually did make it through here, okay? So, and I would imagine we'll get the second one as well. So both of these made it through. Let's go back over and check our rule again and see what type of mistakes we must have made in it. Okay, so I'm going to go to, where are we at here? SMTP1. If we look at our default content checking rule, you're going to find that there are no mistakes in here, okay? This is correct. You need to play around with this a little bit to verify it. The problem we have here is when we install this tool in SMTP gateway mode like we have, it's only checking inbound and outbound emails. Okay, so think about this for a second. Email that comes in through the SMTP server is going to be checked, and email that comes out of the SMTP server is going to be checked. What we just sent was a message from Angelfish to Ray Morey, and this is all done through Exchange 1. Okay, because since both user accounts exist within the same domain, there's no reason to ever even forward it off to SMTP1. So these rules here aren't going to apply. So if you're concerned about checking this stuff, we have a couple options. Number one, these will work for users sending in messages outside of the company and for messages coming inside of the company. So that's a good thing. If you need to have this type of filtering on your internal network, what you're going to have to do is install this as well. You're going to have to install GFI content rules. You're going to have to put this actual mail security tool on the Exchange server as well. Okay, or you can do it instead of putting it here. The reason we put GFI mail security on this SMTP relay server, though, is to just make the Exchange server more efficient. Okay, what we're going to do, last thing, is send some emails from the internet client. Double check this. We want to make sure that our rules are working correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize here, pause this video momentarily, send these emails. We'll double check these as the last thing we do. Okay, those emails have been sent, so they literally just went out less than 10 seconds ago, so we might be checking too soon. Let's go over to XP1 though, and we are logged on here as Ray More. So now these emails both made it through before. Let's click Send Receive and see what we receive now. Okay, here's the first email that we got. This one has fantasy football in the subject, nothing in the message body itself. So you can see that this made it through with fantasy football in the subject, and that's fine because we didn't filter for the subject. So far, I have sent a message, an identical message that had fantasy football in the actual body of the email, and that has not made it through. Let's connect over to our SMTP server. Actually, let's look at a couple places. First, let's look here locally and see if we got a notification. And it looks like we have here. Okay, this particular one, they have found fantasy and football actually in the message itself. And then let's see what else we got here. Found fantasy football again. Okay, so a couple times, maybe I sent that email message twice. We could approve them right here, but I want to show you one more thing within this GFI mail security tool. So we go out to SMTP1 again, and this is kind of a cool tool to use if you get a lot of these. It's not very efficient to check all the emails, so a better way of doing it would be to go out to this moderator client. And this moderator client is going to show you all the information that's been quarantined, so then you can go through these one by one and see them all collectively in one place. Okay, so here's message 7, found block words in the body. Okay, in this particular one, if you want more information on it, open it up and you see the words actually found in the body. You can then open up the email if you want to actually see the email. Oops, let's try this again. HTML body, did you hear about the new Fantasy Football League? Or you can see it in text. Either way. Okay, and then you can see who it was sent from. Or here's who it was actually sent to. Let's see if it has that from. Here's the sender right here. Okay, so if you want to approve this, just click approve. And then that message goes away. It's no longer in the quarantined location. Okay, and the same thing here. We can open this message up and we can see that it's really the same thing. This message, I think, was sent twice or somehow or another got caught twice in these filters. So this one I'm going to go ahead and delete and notify, and that's done. Okay, these other messages, these are what we saw before. Anything that's basically sent to the administrator is going to come through this moderator client like you see right here. Okay, so you've got all those new messages. If you want to get rid of these, you can just delete the item. Okay, so let's check out Ray More real quick here, see if he received that email that he's dying to receive. Okay, and right here, first one, we got the Fantasy Football League information in. And then the second one, here's our GFI mail security notification letting us know that the item has been rejected and deleted. So because we deleted that item and sent out a message, this user has been notified, so at least they know that they were supposed to receive an email, but they didn't receive it for whatever reason. If you look here within the headers, it gives you some information regarding the subject, who the sender was, who the recipient was, so you can at least try to track down what the email was all about. All right, that wraps up video 5 on setting up an SMTP relay server in Exchange 2003. Our next video, video 6, we're going to get into Outlook Web Access in Exchange 2003, and you've seen a little bit of that already. And we're also going to set up SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, lock down this Outlook Web Access client, and see how you can make this work for your organization.